Hi everyone, I'm Niek, I'm from Tune. I'm the CTO and this thing is moving on its own, which is very scary. So maybe let's not do a slideshow and do enter full screen. Great. All right, so I'm just going to talk about three things. I'm going to talk a little bit about myself, just a tiny bit, the abridged edition, not the repeat of 33 years of life. Very shortly about Tune. I want to keep this mostly focused on technology. So the big thing I really want to talk about is that stage between product market fit and being a mature company. It's a stage that we ourselves are still transitioning between. So it's some interesting things that we've learned the hard way I'd like to share with you. Hopefully be fun. The image on the left was me in the conference presentation. It may not be exactly what you're seeing up here on the stage. Changed a little bit. I don't update my LinkedIn picture very often. That said, I joined HasOffers almost 4 years ago, originally as a senior software engineer on the API team on the HasOffers product. Took over as a lead of the tracking engine within a year. I think within a year after that, I was VP of engineering. And then within a year or two after that, I took over as CTO. So it's been a very crazy journey. When I started, we had a dozen engineers. Now we have over 100. I think we had about 30 employees total when I started. Now we're well over 300. So it's been a very large transition for me. We used to all have every year the company Christmas got exponentially bigger, right? So the first year I was there, it was like in the back little kitchen area of our old office. And then the next year I think was at Fair Start. Year after that it was in Georgetown in some big ballroom. And then the year after that we took over some giant place in Soto. So now it's like we're probably like a year away from Key Arena and then another year to Quest Field. So lots and lots of growth. Very little bit about Tune. Company does marketing analytics. It was born not far from here in Belltown, so 45-minute walk if you're brisk, or if you're lazy, you take a 5-minute bus ride. The entire production infrastructure is built out on AWS. We're multi-region, multi-AZ. It's a highly available distributed system, so lots of cool technical challenges tied into that. As I mentioned, over 300 employees. Our engineering is almost entirely in Seattle, with the one little exception, which is a crew we picked up in Texas. So they are our Texan stereotypes we always bust out whenever we have a company meeting. There'll be like a picture of steer or something to make fun of them. So offices worldwide, but most of the offices outside of Seattle are sales related or customer support. So we have Israel, San Francisco, South Korea, Berlin, London, all over the map. Tune has two amazing products. One is a Tune marketing console, which is really focused toward advertisers doing user acquisition on mobile. So we handle paid user acquisition through paid ad campaigns. We do organic user acquisition by optimizing your position in the app stores. We do cross promotion, lots of great stuff. The other big product we have is called HasOffers. This was actually the original product the company was launched with. It was also one of the previous names of the company. So when I joined, it was actually called HasOffers. It took me quite a while to make the mental shift. But HasOffers is essentially a white labeled hosted platform for running an affiliate network, which means click and impression tracking, conversion tracking, letting you manage run a network, pay out affiliates, work with advertisers. So both in the advertising space, both in the marketing space, just one is on the demand side, one's on the supply side. Well, like I said, I don't want to make this a long story about me or Tune. What I really want to talk about is that stage in between, like the lean startup, you're trying to find your product market fit, iterate, pivot, dance. You found a product market fit, great. Now what? That's the phase that we've been in for quite some time. HasOffers a great product, people are willing to pay for it, beautiful revenue growth month after month. Same thing with our mobile app tracking, which now is the Tune marketing console product. Beautiful revenue growth, lots of people love it, people use it. Grow. That's we have the product market fit. Where do we go from here? So there's that middle story in between the book on the left and the apple on the right. In South Parkian terms, this is the classic image that goes with it. I think it's a pretty good summary of the situation. Like, okay, product market fit, and then Boeing, Amazon, Apple. Like, there is something in between those two. And there's lots of individual things you'll find online talking about the journey, but it's surprisingly, there's a lot missing. And a lot of this you hear through war stories, talking to other CTOs, like, oh, I was at blah back in the day, and we did blah, it was a mess, or it worked great, right? Those are ones you hope to hear and hope to steal and then claim credit for. But there's these big transitions that happen. So over there is the original Google setup. And this is actually a couple years out of date now. This is a modern Google data center, right? So things have changed. Like there's that middle, somehow they went from that image to that image. And like, what is that question mark in between? So the two things I want to touch at with my Tune experience, one is about people and one is about technology in that middle stage between, yay, product market fit, cool, and we're not at the other side. We're not that cool. I don't have my own personal data center yet. Maybe a few more years, 2 more, that'll be us. But right now we're still in that journey. But these are some stories about us going along that journey towards maturity. So first thing to talk about is people. So there's 2 episodes in our little travels I want to share. The first one is that, as I mentioned, we have 2 products. Back in the day, the Tune Marketing Console was called Mobile App Tracking, which is also the time the story took place. So time travel, sound effect, woo, 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 2 years ago. 2 products, both were blockbusters, taking off like crazy, beautiful month-over-month growth, revenues exploding, the world is great. But of course, all those users means lots of people using the system, usage is exploding, databases are exploding, engineers are running around, arms waving in the air, buildings on fire, putting a new building at the same time on the side of the building. It's a very intense time period. And back then, all our engineers were hanging out in one office in Belltown, right where Western Avenue hits Bell Street, where they intersect, above Foundation, or formerly known as Venom, very classy location. We were running out of space, but the bigger problem was really we had 2 different engineering orgs, essentially, one for has offers, one for mobile app tracking. These products had differing maturities. Has offers had been around 2 or 3 years longer, had a more established customer base. Customers had built their whole business around it. They had expectations like, yes, they want new feature development, but don't break at all costs. Like, I've got money riding on this thing. And users always say, don't break at all costs, but the reality was mobile app tracking was such an immature field back then that it was really focused on innovate, push us forward, enable, empower us. So wide open territory, go nuts. So we had a division had to move at a very methodical cadence, a division that was more like, we don't have technical debt. Like, our users started 4 months ago, let's go nuts. So that caused a lot of tension right there already, so it makes it hard to share anything if you have those different speeds, right? There was also the issue that mobile app tracking was this newly launched kid in the block that took a lot of executive attention. If you talk to our CTO or CEO, I was VP of engineering back then. If you talk to any of those guys, a lot of their focus was on mobile app tracking because it was this needy little newborn baby, right? Like you have the 4-year-old, yes, you give him attention, but you got like a little 2-month-old every 30 minutes, activate, activate, activate. So it caused tension in the engineering orgs as well. Like engineers could sense, obviously, that a lot of the executive attention was on the group over here. So we were at a decision point. This tension was building, building, building. Things got pretty intense. And beyond this, like looking back at it now is kind of weird, but at the time there was actually sort of a lot of tension and frustration between the executive team too. Like things were just really intense, really focused. We're getting like short fused to each other. So what we did is we took Lee and Luke were actually already, Lee and Lucas are our original founders of Tune. They were already out in Hawaii on vacations, like, hey, let's just go join them. So we used our frequent flyer miles, flew out, like, we decided this on Wednesday, flew out Thursday, and just joined them for like 2 days in Hawaii, made some pretty big decisions. So when it came to this has offers mobile app tracking engineering split, we had a couple of choices. We could maintain the status quo, which is all these engineers sitting together in our office. We could kick out the sales guys and support guys and MISC. Advantage, obviously, engineers sitting together, easier to communicate, easier to collaborate. Get a separate office building for these has offers crew. Or even spin off has offers into a whole separate company. So in Hawaii, great place to make decisions. I was VP of engineering at the time. Our CTO was, we were both in the water, just bobbing up and down the waves, staring off the horizon. It's the ideal decision-making situation. We actually went through all 3, we just went back and forth, right? There's obvious pros and cons between the 3 options we had available. And what we ended up deciding was separate office, just down the street, far enough away, it's a couple blocks down towards Western and Cedar. Still an easy walk, 10 minutes. But to help make this transition easier, we also say, hey, let's give them a really nice, unique space. Let's not just get the El Cheapo B-class real estate, right? And the reasoning behind this was all about communication. Because put yourself in the shoes of one of those has-offers engineers. You're on the older product. Yes, it generates more revenue at that time by quite a bit. But all the focus and attention is going to your little baby brother. So the same engineer, if you think about it from the perspective of the engineer, right? The same thing, it's like, hey, we're putting you in a new office. It's going to be brand new and shiny. It's like, hey! Or like, oh my God, they're shuffling us up in the corner to die, right? They're just going to milk us as long as they can. So one of the really big issues we dealt with at the time is how to own the communication of that move. Because if you mess it up, like people are going to put their own spin on it. And as a decision maker, this is a great move. It makes total sense, but people don't take it that way. Like there's so many times we've seen this happen again and again and again. Move makes total sense. You can explain it, but if you're not ridiculously careful, people misinterpret it or add their own interpretations and it just spins out of control and turns into a big mess. Which is the reason we actually got a really, really nice office space, actually nicer than the space they were moving from, to be like, hey, we're not like putting you out here to die, or we're not sending you to the glue factory. We're going to treat you like kings and queens, build your own little sort of culture. It's actually sort of what we got out of it in the end. It wasn't a utopian shift of, hey, you're over here now, world is beautiful and great. There was definitely uncertainty and doubt, but it took a while to gel and dial in. But at the end of the day, we now have a very well executing office. Engineering executes well, sales executes well, support executes well. It's actually like, in my head, it's my Lake Tahoe cabin. Like these days when I still have a stressful day, I walk down the street and I just sit there, it's like, it's so quiet. And quiet in a good way, not in the bad way. It's built its own little subculture, still part of the greater Tune family, but it has its own vibe to it as well. Like the people have gelled in their own way. So the shift was driven by growth. It was driven by us having 2 successful products, which is really, really cool. To make it work, communication was key, and we worked really, really hard. And beaches in Hawaii are great for decision making, be the last takeaway. The second story I want to share is actually a similar one from growth, which is the first engineering manager we brought in the has-offers product. So way, way back in the day at Tune, our engineering org was essentially this. I was VP of engineering back then. I reported to Lee Brown, our CTO. Each dev team had a lead. The leads reported to me. So pretty flat org, right? The problem was you get more and more dev teams. I have too many direct reports. I was like, hey, this makes absolutely no sense. Let's add a middle layer here. So this looks incredibly reasonable, right? You have a bunch of teams. You add in some engineering managers. They report to you. Life is grand. Like you look at this, makes sense. Why would you argue with this? It's clear, it's logical. But when I pitch this to the has-offers developers or development leads who are reporting to me at the time still directly, it's like, why do we need this person? There's all this pushback from them, a lot of fear, a lot of uncertainty, which is bizarre from the outside perspective, right? You look at the slides, almost none of you work at Tune or have worked at Tune. Like you don't have the emotion, the passion, the connection of being this really small family, and suddenly there's like this stranger coming in between you and your brother over here, right? Like it was a scary, stressful time for these people. The approach I took at the time as VP of engineering, lots of explanation, honest communication with the development leads, and that did not solve the problem. They were still scared, felt a little bit better, they understood my position about why I was doing this, which was, there's not enough of me to go around. You need someone to give you dedicated focus. Pretty simple, succinct message, right? We pulled all those dev leads into the interview cycle for their new boss. Give them a little bit more empowerment and help them understand sort of what they're coming in for. And at the end of the day, I had to leverage my relationship with those guys. It's, hey, I know you guys are still uncertain and have some fear about this, but you trust me. I'm asking you to use that trust, and let's take a chance and see where this goes. This is an actual unsolicited quote from one of our engineers, part of a bigger email, but that's the end result of all this, right? Like it's clear that it should have been done. Ask for trust, communicate the best I can, empower and loop in the best I can. And it succeeded at the end, right? And it's obvious, you can't have 15 direct reports. So really, really great result. Again, consequence of growth. I think to me, one of the big takeaways is even change that makes total sense can be really scary. So like the office moves, okay, people can interpret that different ways, but like your org's growing, you went from 15 engineers to 50 engineers. It's time to add in some more management or some more direction.
That seems so unoffensive as a concept, but it's still really, really scary to people. So it behooves you to make it as comfortable, a warm and fuzzy, happy place as you can. I threw out my ideas on the matter, and it worked out great. And there's no way those engineers would ever go back to reporting directly to me. They wouldn't want to. So changes driven by growth. Again, and this is true not just on technical leadership, but anything you try to do, make a company vision statement, specify company goals, people interpret it in so many different ways. It's like, where do you come up with this stuff? I told it to you, I wrote it in an email, I did an interpretive dance of what I'm trying to tell you, and you're still way over here and you're understanding what I'm trying to say. So do your best to put yourself in those people's shoes, communicate, and you'll hopefully get somewhere pretty good. So I gave you 2 happy examples. I'm not going to go into detail on the sadder examples. So one of the ones we're currently sort of struggling with is the adoption of Docker in our organization. So we built out like a CI system, deployment system, like our new sort of modus operandi is Docker oriented. But our communication on this has been pretty awful, and it's the dystopian shot from Metropolis here. It's not been a good situation. So that's one of the ones I'm going to work on in the coming weeks. The second thing I want to touch on is technology. These quotes are actually from High Scalability. They have the beautiful weekly sort of blog post summary, and I steal Twitter quotes and I stick them on a Confluence page. I can reuse them for presentations like this. So the evolution of process or technology stacks from baby to mature, and again, we're in the middle step somewhere. Startups, you're always a hamster wheel, MySQL, PHP, or if you're the cool kid on the block these days, be Postgres and Node. You get your product market fit, you start expanding into like this highly redundant array of inexpensive hamsters. You keep shoveling hamsters into your hopper as quickly as you can because customers are growing, your system's growing, and somehow while all that's happening, you try to transition to this fighter jet, which is where you want to be. We're still somewhere in between. There's a fighter jet maybe, but if you open some of the panels, there'll still be some little wheels spinning. Has offers and mobile app tracking and then Tune as a whole. Very common theme, right? Because when you're in those beginning phases of an idea, there is so much debt you accumulate. You're iterating quickly, you're making mistakes, you're made architectural design decisions which are directions that didn't pan out. They stay in there like an appendix, all these vestigial organs, they just sort of accumulate. So it's been a long battle, and one that we're very much fighting, as I said. The one bright piece is there is sort of light at the end of the road now. Like we know where we want to go. We know how to get there. These days, the biggest thing that keeps me awake at night is how do we move quickly enough from where we are to where we need to be while still innovating and driving the product forward. It's balancing those needs. So I'm still bulk ordering hamsters right now and tossing them in one side of my architectural engine. And I'm also slowly starting to order more and more jet parts. So less hamster, higher jet. I wasn't sure how the timing would go in this talk, to be honest, because I usually don't give 30-minute talks, I give longer ones, and this is also not the sort of content I usually talk about, even though it's very important and dear to me. But LinkedIn, actually, some really good articles they shared about their data infrastructure evolution. How they went from like MySQL, Oracle, and hamsters to this powerful data bus concept of Kafka as the unifying glue, to Voldemort, how it all fits together into one sort of cohesive whole. So there's some really good articles out there. If you go around, there's even more. One of these is an interview with Jay Krebs. The second one is actually from like 2013. Both really, really good articles. And I had some white space, so I stuck a slide rule on there. Don't know why. That said, there's really, really good news for all of us. So Has Offers started, so I've been there almost 4 years, but the company's been around longer than that. I think they started 2008-ish, 2009. Back then there were less great choices. Like, yes, open source had been around, open source was healthy, but there's some really cool things that have come in on the open source front that are really empowering. So if you're starting fresh now, you can maybe don't start with a jet, but you can actually start like a Honda Civic as opposed to like hamsters. So some of these techs are still immature, like Spark streaming, but if I was starting from scratch, those would be one of the first things I reach for. Kafka is getting there quickly. Kubernetes is still pretty mature, right? But it's one of those technologies, if I'm building from scratch, I can get to this We're going to get there eventually. Maybe not Kubernetes, might be Mesos and Marathon, but we're going to get there. But for us, it's going to be a hard fight because we got to take this giant existing monster and transition it over. If you're starting fresh, like, it's not that hard, right? It's like, wow, there's great choices. I can build great infrastructure that scales, is usable, understandable. I don't need a PhD to maintain it. So there's cool stuff there. AWS, Google Cloud Platform. Google Cloud Platform didn't even exist when we launched HasOffer as a product. AWS was super mature. They had like the M1s, the M2s, and that was it. So those guys have really developed their portfolios. You can build things correctly without spending lots of infrastructure investment. Cool. And then SaaS companies have also evolved, right? So I can, if I'm starting from scratch now and I don't want to end up with this technological horror, sure, pick Librato for your initial metric solution. Pick Sumo Logic to handle your logs. Pick PagerDuty for on-call. So like Sumo Logic, we're not going to use because we built out on our own, right? We have Logstream, we have Stash, we have this really cool infrastructure built out. Kibana, I can have all my logs unified, but that was a lot of work that went into that. So great news is you don't have to suffer as much as we have suffered. Many nerds across the industry have suffered on your behalf. They have suffered for your future sins, I guess. Leverage what they've done for you. So that'll be great. Originally, I wanted to talk about 3 things, but time-wise, I figured I only have time to talk about 2. The big one I skipped was actually process. So people, your org changes, how you interact with each other, that's the change as you grow, right? Between that initial product market fit where you're on a kitchen table to Google where you have 20 people between you and the CEO. So people has to change. Technology stack has to change. You start with a hamster, you end up with a fighter jet, hopefully, or maybe you stick with a hamster forever, whatever makes sense. But these are all things that as you succeed, those are artifacts of your success, right? You're gonna have to change these things, rewire them, try to keep the wheels on the bus or change a wheel on the bus while the bus is barreling down the street. Last one is process again, right? Early stage or seed stage startup, you don't want or need any real process. And then your Google scale, they still empower engineers, but there's a lot of stuff going on there, right? Like how do you handle builds? How do you handle deploys? And process touches, so if I had time, I would have talked about onboarding. I wish that we'd tackled that better, but we haven't, especially engineering onboarding. And then the thing that we're just really starting to tackle in depth is bringing security process in a way that doesn't mess up the empowerment of engineers. So thank you. That's a more modern picture of me. I think we're out of time. So thank you.